Welcome. This is the Free Market Roadshow, probably the largest annual series of public conferences on economics. Remarkable experts are discussing the challenges and providing libertarian solutions to today's problems. Organized by the Austrian Economic Center in cooperation with select institutes, universities and think tanks, the Free Market Roadshow tours all over Europe. Today we pay a visit to Thessaloniki.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Free Market Roadshow. My name is Irene Kontra, Business and Leadership Coach, and I am the Vice President of Marketing Club. Let me introduce you to one of the most powerful non-profit organizations in Greece in the fields of business, marketing and entrepreneurship. Our members are executives in marketing and management, professional and entrepreneurs in all fields of economy. Our vision is to excel the operation of marketing as the most important operation that brings value and world-class communication to the organization and its internal and external stakeholders. Business networking, brainstorming games, and high-level masterclasses are some of our high-impacted services and tools. We strongly believe that lifelong learning is the core principle for business development, self-leadership, and entrepreneurial thinking. At the Free Market Roadshow, we participate since 2017. If you would like to learn more about Marketing Club, you can visit us at www.marketingclub.gr.
Hello from sunny Greece and welcome to today's Free Market Roadshow event. Thank you, Irene Kontra, for your great presentation of Marketing Club of Greece. My name is Lalatsis and I represent the Marketing Club of Greece as Chief of the Education Team. Our topic today is IP, brand protection and patents, the foundation of innovations. A topic that really resonates with today's environment, both in the medical field with the talk around vaccines for the pandemic, but with startups and their war for innovation. I'm looking forward to today's keynote speech from Jörgen Warborn and our panel discussion afterwards. Now let's jump right to it and hear the keynote speech by Jörgen Warborn, who is a Swedish entrepreneur and a politician of the Moderator party. She was mayor of Varberg municipality from the 2010 general election until his election into the Swedish parliament in 2014. He was re-elected to the Swedish Riksdag in 2018. In addition to his role in parliament, Warborn briefly served as a member of the Swedish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in 2019, and he has been the national chairman of the Moderator Party's Business Council since 2016. Jörgen Warborn is a newly elected member of the European Parliament. He is a member of the Committee on International Trade and a substitute of the Committee on Transport and Tourism and the Budget Committee. In addition, he is the EPP Group Vice Coordinator in the Committee on International Trade. Jörgen Warborn is also a member of the Delegation for Relations with Mercosur and a substitute member of the Delegation for Relations with China. He is also a board member of the EPP SME Circle and Vice President of SME Europe of the EPP. Let's go straight to the keynote speech by Jörgen Warborn.
My name is Jörgen Warborn. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Swedish Moderate Party and the group of the European People's Party, the EPP. Among other things, I work in the Committee for International Trade. Today I'd like to talk to you about intellectual property rights, and those, as you know, are given to persons of the creations of their minds. This is very important for the economy, and you probably know this, but I will say a few things about the different IP rights. First, we have copyright and copyrighted related ones, which are usually creative, like the rights of authors of books and artistic works. They are time-bound to be a minimum of 50 years after the death of the creators. There is a difference between the author's moral rights and the economic rights. The moral right means that the author has the right to be credited when his or her work is presented or used. The economic right is the author's exclusive right to dispose of the work by presenting or making it available to the public, like presenting a movie or a play. Secondly, there is IP rights of industrial property. This could be the protection of distinctive signs such as trademark and geographical indications, like Parma, for example. This aims to stimulate fair competition and protect consumers. Those are not time-bound. Other types of industrial property that are protected most to stimulate innovation and design and the creation of technology. In this category, we have inventions which are protected by patents, industrial design, and trade secrets. The purpose of IP of industrial property is to provide protection for the results of investments in the development of new technology, giving the incentive and means to finance research and development. Successful intellectual property rules should also make the transfer of technology in the form of foreign direct investment, joint ventures, and licensing easier. The protection is usually given for a specific time period, typically 20 years in the case of patents. But why are these IP rights so important? Well, intellectual property rights create an economic value. IP and patent rights are preconditions for innovation, which is necessary for successful companies that provide prosperity in our societies. Innovation and risk-taking should always pay off. Otherwise, no one would dare to do it. It's also important in order to build an entrepreneurial culture where inventors are rewarded for their ideas. I therefore believe in strong copyright protections. Ideas and creations should not automatically become common property. And we should also strengthen patent and trademark protections. Meanwhile, protection of geographical indications take up a disproportionately big part of the EU's current efforts to protect IP rights. Naturally, there needs to be a balance so that innovation and risk-taking is rewarded, but there can be healthy competition that makes products even better and cheaper for consumers. During the COVID crisis, we have heard voices here in the European Parliament and around the world that want to weaken the World Trade Organization's IP rights of certain important products, such as vaccines. This is wrong, because patents are the very reason that companies invest time and money into developing vaccines. And we need the pharmaceutical companies to want to develop them. For pharmaceuticals, IP rights are designed to encourage research and innovation, to incentivize pharmaceutical companies to come up with the new life-saving medicines, as their patents will be insured for a certain period. This period should be long enough to ensure the investment is worth it. Meanwhile, allowing the patent to be lifted in due time for other companies to make copies of the medicine, which will result in competition, higher quality, and lower prices for patients. We need to make sure that vaccines that are developed can be manufactured and distributed in large quantities all over the world, for example, through the COVAX cooperation. Right now, companies are already cooperating with each other on a massive scale to overcome technical and engineering challenges to scale up manufacturing of cutting-edge vaccines. Unfortunately, there is a false narrative emerging that intellectual property is a barrier to such collaboration and that weakening IP rights would lead to a quick increase in vaccine supply. Instead of questioning IP rights, countries and manufacturers should be working together to strengthen healthcare systems, streamline regulatory approvals, and address supply chain bottlenecks in order to speed vaccine distribution globally. Losing IP rights in the EU now, that would erode them forever. Protecting IP rights is necessary to develop medicines not only for the COVID, but for the future as well. The EU should be proud of its strong competition rules. They have served us well thus far. IP rights are a preconditions for international trades. Among other things, it can help to build trust and fight counterfeiting. An erosion of intellectual IP rights could therefore give reasons for countries to close up and act protectionists. Incorporating IP into international trade has enabled us to exchange consumer goods on a global scale, lift millions of people out of poverty, and facilitate innovation across the globe. Ensuring that this trend continues in the post-COVID era is a key issue. Free, diverse trade needs to go hand in hand with strong IP and patent rights. They are equally important for all the parts of the world, and everyone profits. IP rights are also paramount for us to bounce back and build a more competitive Europe for the future. For IP rights, there is a balance to be struck, and answers are not always clear-cut when it comes to different policy objectives. But any liberal, pro-trade agenda must include strong IP rights. I hope this overview can serve as some food for thought as part of the Free Market Roadshow. Thank you very much.
Great point by Jörgen Warborn. Thank you so much, Jörgen. I think she actually set the stage for our talk, so I will not waste any more time and say that I am honored to host three unique gentlemen here today on this panel. Mr. Athanasios Leontaris, Mr. Nikolaos Tsoniotis, and Mr. Ilias Hatzis. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming here today, or actually for logging on here today, since this is a pure digital event. Mr. Leontaris, will you start and introduce yourself and give your brief statement about today's topic?
Sure. My name is Thanos Leontaris. Unfortunately, as far as I can see, I probably don't have a great connection. I'm so sorry about that. So I'm Thanos Leontaris. I'm an attorney here in Greece, in Thessaloniki. Our firm works a lot with startups, obviously, and we work a lot with intellectual property creators. So from creators ranging from, so to speak, the creative industry, in the sense that fashion industry. We do some film producing. We have also worked a little bit with industrial designs. So a broad range of IP. So in terms of what we believe and how we believe IP should work in a modern environment, I feel like what we do have to say is that there seems to be a lack of understanding, I guess, especially from small business owners who are creators themselves, so as to how they can actually use that intellectual property that they're creating to make money from it. And obviously, that's where lawyers and the legislative framework, and especially the legislative framework that has been created by the European Union, the implementing regulations of the European Patent Office, for example, and how they can use all that intellectual property they have created, they have put money in to make money for them. So I feel like the first thing we should really say here is that we need to have a cultural change and have people, and especially business persons, understand that the IP they're creating is valuable to someone out there, to someone who wants to either use IP to create a product that you cannot yourself build, obviously, as a business. And so I guess as an introductory note, I think that's what I want to say, that we need to see a cultural shift in businesses to understand that there are ways to exploit, to work with their IP and make sure that they're doing the best they can to profit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leontaris. I think that everyone always needs a lawyer, so you're going to be really useful. Mr. Nikolaos Tsoniotis, would you care to introduce yourself and give us your brief statement around today's topic?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Nikolaos Tsoniotis. I'm a partner at Ideas Forward, which is a technology venture studio in Thessaloniki, Greece. What we do is that we bring either internal ideas or external ideas coming from other people we collaborate in the spotlight, and then we create businesses out of that. My take on intellectual property is rather, it has two different levels. One level has to do with startups, because I've been working with startups for a long time and I've started up my own businesses and been there. And it has to do with the two opposites of how intellectual property is understood. You have one side, that's one opposite, that says, I'm not going to tell my idea to anyone, because what if they copy me? That's a problem, because people seem not to be able to understand that conveying value is not the same as conveying the way. And I agree with that with Thanos, that there need to be a different understanding of that, a different perception shift into what IP rights are. And the other one is people who just completely fail to understand how this works, because at the end of the day, IP rights and protecting your intellectual property is part of a strategy for a business. Now, the other level that I've been involved is technology transfer in academia. And there it seems to be, at least in Greece, there seems to be a lack of understanding of the kind of value and the kind of perpetual value that it creates for academic institutions. So, yeah, my focus is on these two different levels, and hopefully today we'll have time and the opportunity to at least answer some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tsoniotis. I think that we are setting our bar a little bit too high, because I don't think that we're going to have so much time to touch on everything that you said. Let's move on to our third speaker, Mr. Ilias Hatzis. Could you please introduce yourself and give your own brief statement about IP rights?
Yes, thank you for inviting me here today to this panel. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 30 years. I've created companies in 10 different countries in the United States, primarily and in Greece. I've raised money for my startups. I've had 2 exits. And over the last 2 years, I've been running a startup incubator and a venture capital fund that invests in startups in Greece. We actually just completed 2 investments in March, investing in 2 early stage startups, 100,000 each. With regards to intellectual property, I don't know. The reality is, I think that intellectual property, we need to differentiate between intellectual property and between intellectual monopoly. To a certain limit, intellectual property is certainly useful, and it can help protect creators and what they create. But there have been extreme cases throughout the world where it's turned into an intellectual monopoly, and it's become a way for big corporations to stifle innovation and to, create large costs for very small startups that are trying to compete with them. And so, to be honest with you, I think when it comes to startups, intellectual property can be very difficult, and it can be poison, because the reality is that it stifles innovation. And in a world that we live, which is about sharing, an open economy, open innovation, platforms like GitHub, where people are sharing their code and others are adding on top of it, I think it further advances knowledge and creates better products.
All right. So now we're at the panel stage, and I'm going to switch to first name basis, since we kind of know each other by now. I'm going to start immediately because I think that all three of you kind of touched the same point. And the first question is, how can we actually implement IP in order to support small business owners and startups, but at the same time, not actually commit anyone who doesn't want to invest? So how can we protect getting a profit, but also having kind of a fair competition? And Ilias, I'm going to start with you.
To be honest with you, the startups that I work with today, my goal isn't for that. I mean, if I look at them as an entrepreneur, my advice to them is go out there and build your product and do what you need to do about getting customers. The best way to protect what you're doing is by getting product market fit and by growing your market size. For me, that is very important. As the company becomes larger and they try to fortify their position, the reality is that companies will put in place, will seek out to protect intellectual property because potentially, they're not innovating as much as they were at earlier stages. From an investor standpoint, investors look for unfair advantages in the companies that they invest in and try to find some kind of defensibility in the companies they invest, what kind of intellectual property they may have or things they may develop that will make it difficult for other companies to compete with them. But that doesn't necessarily mean, going out there and getting a patent. I think for most small startups, of course, I've never attempted this in Greece, but in the United States, it can be very costly in general, for a startup with limited resources, limited funds that's just getting started. Trying to go out there and think about how can I secure whatever intellectual property I develop can be very costly, and they're missing the big picture, which is getting customers to buy into their product.
Yeah. Also, just a point, we're going to get some questions from the audience, so I'm going to try and kind of squeeze them in wherever I can. Thanos, as a lawyer, and moving on from that, how can IP be implemented? And as Ilias said, with the startup making a waterproof plan for an investor who wants to invest in it.
Okay, so first of all, I don't want to be rude here, but I strongly disagree with Ilias. So I strongly disagree. First of all, I doubt that any investor is looking for an unfair advantage. That's not it. Certainly, they're looking for some sort of, good, value in terms of what are you creating? Are you creating a software? Are you creating some sort of device which can be patentable? Are you creating a design which is so unique, which you want to, so to speak, protect with a design, which is an intellectual property of its own? So it largely depends on what you have in your hands. So the good thing is, in Greece at least, that we have really good advantages for solo inventors to go ahead and patent and go ahead and have patent applications done in Greece, and again to the EPO and the WIPO, whatever they want to implement that, which means basically that in terms of fees, basic fees, they're very, very low. I think they're like 90% less than a corporation would pay. So that's really good in terms of what we're doing here in Greece to help them out. There's also a good thing here in the European Union, which has started, I think it was in early March. There's a very good incentive program, which is incentivizing all small businesses in Europe, in the EU to be more accurate, to go ahead and register trademarks, register designs, register all that really critical IP throughout the EU and their home countries, member states of the EU. So it looks like that the EU is really trying, in terms of policy at least, to go ahead and incentivize businesses to register their intellectual property. Obviously, I have to say that if we're discussing about anything that can be manufactured, it is very difficult, and I'll agree with Ilias on that. It is very difficult to go ahead and be able to register everywhere. This is costly. You're very correct. Obviously, it is very easy for someone to be in China, for example, go ahead and copy your design if you haven't registered it there, and go ahead and mass produce your invention, your device, or your design, whatever that may be. I totally agree. This is very difficult, and we have to find a way to help small businesses and startups to do that. Other than that, I think that in terms of strategy and in terms of first steps, I would strongly suggest that people who are working together on creating intellectual property, whatever that may be, whether it is software, whether it is a design, whether it is something patentable, I would strongly recommend that they at the very least agree between themselves, what kind of rights each one of them has on that design, invention, whatever that may be. And why I'm saying this is because at the very least, what we can do is protect what we have in terms of intellectual property as a trade, which is something that the EU has now for approximately a couple of years as an EU directive, and now we have it in Greece as legislation as well. So at the very least, it's a trade secret for the purposes of legislation between the people who have shared that information. Later on, you can afterwards discuss whether or not there's a point in registering your intellectual property, whatever that may be, and of course into applicable, legislative frameworks. So yeah, I guess that's where I would start, right? I would start by creating the sort of trade secret agreements between the people who are actually creating the intellectual property in the beginning.
I think the idea of the panel is to actually disagree with each other. I would feel really bad if we all agreed and we're like, oh yes. So I think the idea is to disagree. Nikos, you want to give us your input with your vast experience on startups?
Yeah, vast experience. Okay.
He's saying
I
you're
think
old,
that
that's why he's saying that.
you need. It's like saying I'm old, right? I think that since you want us to disagree, I'm the third wheel in the company because I agree with what Thanos said at the end, that at least the founders should have a clear understanding between them about the possession or what kind of value they share between themselves. Because I've seen many startups just crumble. They had all the potential in the world and it just crumbled down because the founders disagreed and then they couldn't share the value. I would also have to agree with Ilias, saying that, as I said in my opening statement, that patenting, IPR, creating the moat, as the US people say that, is a strategy. So it doesn't really make sense to do that in the beginning where your funds and resources are limited. It will probably make sense, especially if we're not talking about software, but we're talking about other things that are tangible. And I will give you an example on that, why it matters, at least in my eyes. You can do that later because meanwhile, you can get customers and convey the value, but not convey the way. And the way is what you patent, the way is what you protect, not the value that you create. The value that you create, you have to bring it out to the customers very fast, be first in the market, or even if you're not first, just be out in the market, get in front of your customers and work with them. At some point or another, this, if it makes sense, it can be protected and so on. The reason I'm saying that protection of intellectual property matters is because a couple of years ago, Germany was the first country in the world in terms of industrial capacity. This is not because Germany had the most industries or industrial plants facilities in the world. It's because Germany controlled, through sub-licensing of the patents, most of the industrial processes in the world. And there's a difference, how they do it in Germany and how we do it in Greece. For every billion euros invested in research and development, they get out something like 117 patents, 120 patents, right? In Greece, this in turn is for every billion invested in R&D, we may be likely to get 7 patents a year. 5 of them are in chemical products. This is not a way to control any process and be positioned, at least as a country, in a global spectrum of in a global market and have any say into how things progress or how things, negotiations and anything like that. So, yeah, you don't have to patent at the early stages. There's not enough resources for that. Convey the value, but yeah, at some point, especially when you're working with tangible assets, you have to be able to protect your positioning in the market. I don't know if that resonates with the other speakers.
It does. It does.
I think that we can all agree that we're 29 years old for starters, Nikos, before I give to Thanos.
Yeah,
exactly. Thano, you want to comment on Nikos' statement?
Yes. Just in terms of what Nikos was saying about Germany and its patents. Just as a side note, remember that the European Patent Office its headquarters are in Munich, in Germany. So that's also something to note as well. There is a very big intellectual property practice area for lawyers and for law firms in and around Munich, which is totally amazing as well. Just making that as well.
So we're getting really interesting questions. So I'm only going to do one more of my own, and then we're going to move on to the audience questions. Ilias, Jörgen Warborn mentioned that IP protection is a tool that enables investors to invest and make profit, obviously. So is it actually a tool for investing in R&D? Does it actually help in investing, especially in R&D and IP protection?
When I spoke earlier about having an unfair advantage, when it comes to startups, because most startups fail, 9 out of 10 startups are going to fail, investors always look for an edge. That's actually what I meant when I was talking about an unfair advantage earlier. So for an investor to invest regardless of the stage of the company is in, if the company has created something, some kind of intellectual property that gives it an advantage in a market when competing with others, it definitely is on the radar of most investors. I mean, because you look, I mean, the way you look at a market like mobile phones, okay? I don't know what patents existed for mobile phones, but I know that Apple in 2007 came out with a phone that was 10 times better than anything that was in the market. And even though the market was dominated by Scandinavian companies like Ericsson and Nokia, they lost the market. And the reality is that, even though Apple, probably had all kinds of patents on the phone that it created, Google came around and created something that was a little bit more open and was able to be installed on all kinds of devices. And today, Android is 80% of the market, and Apple is 20% of the market. What I'm trying to say is that patents give investors, give companies certain advantages, but the reality is a patent cannot stop innovation, and there are going to be inventions and people that come out there that are going to take the market because they have a better product, and their product is probably based on what they've seen out there that somebody else built before them, and they've made significant improvements on that. So, but yes, patents can be important for investors.
Nikos, from your experience with investors, is a strong patent an incentive for an investor to invest more in R&D?
Yeah, I mean, you see that in the way in the portfolio companies of VCs in Greece, but you can see that everywhere, is that when you have deep tech companies, deep tech startups, where the founders, usually they come out of a PhD or academic research or anything like that, they have this secret know-how, regardless of whether they have patented or copyrighted or anything. And investors it's easier for them to see that there's going to be a strategy for exploiting this value that is protected because nobody else knows about it, right? So you see in deep tech companies that although investors, my experience at least, is that they divide their investments into deep tech and market innovation. These are the two complete opposites in their spectrum, right? Deep tech comes from research, and usually what you see is that they get investments at very early stages without traction. And then you have market innovation, which are companies like software and apps and so on and so forth. But usually what happens is that investors require this kind of initial traction just to make sure that the problem is validated and the market will need it, right? This is not always the case when you have deep tech companies because of this secret knowledge and potentially IP protected that they have. And then, of course, it's sectoral, right? Medical, industry, manufacturing, and so on and so forth.
Thanos, bring your own expertise on this matter.
I guess I'm not sure if, so in order for a company to consider investing in R&D, they will have to understand the value of IP, right? So I guess if a company realizes what kind of value it creates for it to receive an investment, as Nikos is very correctly saying, then I guess, sure, we can say that it incentivizes them to spend more on R&D. I think that what you need to do in this case is make sure that the people who are involved in funding startups understand funding, not necessarily startups, but also IP intensive companies. I think that they will have to understand how they work and what do they need from them in terms of VC funding and all that. It is my opinion that everybody's doing, and I mean here I mean the EU mostly, the legislation that is being created for some time now, for the past couple of years, it really tries to help companies be incentivized via either tax credits, tax rebates, by providing the sort of cash flow sometimes through a variety of different financial instruments to be able to help with research and development. Because I feel like the EU has understood the importance of creating intellectual property that is valuable and that is worthy on the world stage to be sold, and implemented in devices. Okay, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? You need to create IP that will be valuable and will make money for the creator of that IP. So I feel like, yes, at the end of the day, what we were discussing before, it takes an investor to understand the value of this IP to be able to invest in something that is so IP intensive. I guess that would be my answer.
So I'm going to grab a question from the audience because I see a couple of great questions. Martin Goodinger, I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, is asking, don't the developments in the intersection of IT, medicine, and finance, for example, biohacking, decentralized finance, open source software, show that the most innovative areas often don't rely on IP? And open source software was something that I also wanted to touch upon. And Ilias, what is your take on this?
I fully agree. I mean, I'm very much involved as an entrepreneur in the blockchain cryptocurrency area. And if you look at this space, everything is open sourced, and people are taking what somebody else might have wrote and extending it and making it better. So there's a lot of innovation going on in this market, and it just shows you that value and for whether it is for the organizations that are creating the value or for the customers who are using their products isn't necessarily something that needs to be protected. It can be open and everyone can still benefit. I fully agree.
Nikos?
Again, I'm going to bring my point back to strategy. Open sourcing something is part of a strategy. It's not like a random urge you have to just, okay, I've done that, please take it world, and that's it. If you have a business plan, if you don't, and you start and I say this in a funny way, like if you start in a geeky way, and I've been known to be geeky sometimes, if you start out in a geeky way and say, just take it out there, then it's public domain. You can't take it back, right? You might not even believe it when you do it. And then we're talking, no, it's open source. No, it's not open source. You made a mistake. Now, if open sourcing something is part of a strategy, which I'm all for it, right? I think it fosters innovation to a large degree, but we have to consider what things are open sourced. Open sourcing Linux is a platform where everybody can work in a new economy that was coming out at the time. Open sourcing blockchain, which is a completely disruptive idea in the market, it's the only way you can get to a point where enough people are involved in it, and then it actually gains traction and becomes innovation, because in my mind, innovation is directly related to the market. If the market does not uptake, it's not even novelty, it's just a novelty, right? So it all depends on what we're talking about. I will give you an example, right? Seeds for planting, and we've seen that throughout Europe, are now IP protected. Right? So typically, I cannot go out and plant tomatoes. This to me is a problem. This to me is a disgrace. It's a disgrace because, and I'm not pro the egalitarian kind of notion of a society, because we're not there as a human race, but there should be some limits. On the other hand, right, some things are protected that should be common property. And I'm not talking about vaccines. I agree with the keynote speaker. The amount of investment that it takes to come to a point where you have a vaccine like that, it's huge. There has to be some return, right? So open source, yes, as long as it's part of a strategy and it's part of something bigger. Tesla, for instance, open sourced the battery pack, if I'm not wrong, but they did that after they came to a point where they could lead the market, right? So part of a strategy again. I have an idea that I want to patent, just to give you a personal example, about a hydroelectric mechanism, which I will open source up to 1 kilowatt of installed power. But going, or up to 5, it doesn't matter at this point. But I will open source that because I need this to be, it's part of a frugal innovation kind of thing, and I need this to be uptaken. But going over 5 kilowatts, then I will make it part of a strategy that will attract manufacturers across the globe and so on and so forth. So it all depends. It all depends. There's no black or white. There's a lot of gray into that spectrum, right?
So one point, as soon as I go home, I'm going to take out my tomatoes from my garden. I feel that I'm a little bit living on the outlaw, as an outlaw now. Thanos, you agreed a lot with Nikos throughout his talk. Did you feel the same way?
Yes and no. Well, first of all, I'll agree in the sense that, like, for me, drafting contracts for open source software is literally a nightmare. And I'll tell you why. Because open source software, while we call it open source, it is one of the most, and I'll be honest with you, one of the most complicated notions, especially for software. It's one of the most complicated notions I have ever seen. To be able to navigate all the open source licenses out there, it's a very, very difficult thing. So that's one thing I just wanted to say. Always to make a note here that whether you call it open source or you want to call it free, freemium, whatever, it is still intellectual property, okay? Whether or not the license provides you with enough freedom to do many things with the software, it is still a part of the intellectual property legal system, okay? So that's something important to note here. Because unfortunately, sometimes when we do freedom to operate investigations for a number of software or for devices, we run into the problem that sometimes startups have used software that was not supposed to be used the way it was. And then they come back to us and they say, well, it was open source, so why couldn't we use it that way? Well, if the license didn't say you could, then you couldn't. So there's always this risk with open source. I'll say something about blockchain, though, because it's something that I also teach about this at the University of Nicosia. And one of the projects that came out of the university is an application that puts health data on an a private Ethereum blockchain, so to speak. So what they do, it is very interesting, is they use this method to implement the health data on the blockchain. But while I agree about the blockchain and how it should be open and how it's a very disruptive technology, I cannot say that I feel the same for the actual implementation of the application. So, for example, the application will be on a phone, right? It will be on a phone. It will have, specific sets of data. It will have specific sets of colors, of graphics, and all that good stuff. I do not think that just simply because it's a blockchain-based innovation application, whatever you want to call it, that it should be a part of the public domain. People have worked a lot on applications, and they should be able to have, first dibs, so to speak, on the money that this application might or might not make. So I feel like we need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that at the end of the day, businesses need to make money to reinvest their earnings in research and to provide jobs, to do all the things that we want businesses to do in an ethical way in a business environment.
I'm going to catch another question real quick, and I think that this kind of mostly goes for Ilias and Nikos. Danny Ligerinos is saying, let's say that I have a startup and it goes really well and I get my IP and I have some profit. The question is, how can I make my startup a small company or something to a franchise? I'm not really sure if Danny is actually talking about using the IP in a larger scale, but I think that he may be talking about the process of a startup becoming a franchise. Ilias, from your experience, how can something like that, a path like that, how would that look like?
I'm not very experienced with franchises. I'm just gonna, from what I know though, the reality is the franchisees should be, my understanding is need to be buying things from you, basically. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if it's about IP, but about dependency on whatever it is that makes up your product, different things that are needed that they need to be purchasing from you in order to use create your product and use your brand. So I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, you look at franchises like McDonald's, they provide the franchisee with everything that they need to operate the store, and the franchisee is obligated actually to be purchasing from them in order to deliver the Big Mac. So I think that's what it comes down to. I don't know. I mean, with regards to intellectual property, I think it would be protecting yourself against Burger King coming along trying to replicate McDonald's, not necessarily a franchisee.
Yeah. Nikos, about the process of, from a startup with an IP to a company to franchise?
I'm a bit confused with Ilias on that, because when we're talking about franchise, we're talking about a branded model that comes with all the bells and whistles, right? I don't know how IP fits into that category, right? I would maybe what our friend is suggesting is whether they can sub-license their IP rights to people who want to use it. Maybe that, because the franchise model doesn't have anything to do with
Exactly.
IP rights, right? It's a business model. It's not doesn't have to do with how you handle your IP rights. For instance, as Ilias said, McDonald's has the IP rights for the Big Mac, which they developed in response to the Whopper. I can't remember the name for that Burger King came out. So there's an IP on that, right? But they don't sub-license the IP to every franchisee they have in the world to use it. What they do is they have the contractual agreement which comes with obligations from the side of the franchisee against the brand. I suppose that this agreement holds all the IP rights are property of the Thanos would be more, but I think that maybe our friend is talking about sub-licensing. If we can make that distinction, then yes, sub-licensing is not franchise. You can sub-license. For instance, I have a case right now with, let's say, a friend that came to Ideas Forward, and he has created a patent on a particular equipment anyway. He sub-licensed that to someone in Greece with exclusivity for Greece. And the idea is that he's going to sub-license that to other countries with exclusivity per manufacturer per country. I don't know if that's the case that he's trying to describe here. That's IP. Exactly, right?
Hopefully we captured almost all scenarios. Since we're getting to like our last 10 minutes, another great question by Martin Gudiger. I think that it's mostly like a philosophical question. He's asking, would you say that ideas are scarce resources in the same sense as tangible things can be scarce resources economically? And Thanos, what do you say about this?
With the rate of new things that are coming to us, I would say that they're not. I think that there's many great ideas out there, and there's many bright minds out there with fantastic ideas. Obviously, I'm not going to say that because they're great ideas are money makers, or that they are, going to, provide value to the economy. Sure, they're great ideas. The point is, will we have these ideas that will, create value for our economy, or, be a money maker for the person that has dreamt them up? But always, I just want to make this note. The ideas are great, but the implementation is all that matters, honestly. Because there's always people are coming to us as lawyers and they say, I want to, protect this idea. I don't want anyone else to do it. And we're like, you cannot really do that. You can't protect an idea. It doesn't work that way. You can protect the method. You can protect, an industrial process, maybe, software. You can do all that, but you cannot protect an idea. Implementation at the end of the day is what matters.
Can I say a personal anecdote on that?
Yes, of course.
Right, just a quick second. I was once developing an automation mechanism for a company, and they asked me to install a feature that I thought was crap, basically. So I told them, why would we do that? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and engineering-wise, it doesn't make any sense. So the guy I was working for said, okay, look, you're not the brightest engineer out there. You're definitely not the most handsome engineer out there. And what you're doing right now, there's about 100,000 people doing it at the other side of the world. So just do it because the customer wants it, and that's it. So I agree with Thanos. It's the execution, and I agree with Ilias. It's what value you convey with your customers.
If I may add one thing.
Yeah.
It's okay. Go ahead. No, it's fine.
No, go.
I'm just going to, with both Thanos and Nikos, I mean, execution is the multiplier that makes companies into billion-dollar ideas. I mean, one quick example is in, early 2000, you had all kinds of social media. The idea, I mean, you had MySpace, you had Facebook, you had all kinds of companies out there. I think MySpace had raised so much money, but at the end of the day, they went out of business because Facebook just executed in a fantastic way that nobody else was executing. Just making it available initially only to a niche market on campuses. It's for students, and just creating this whole virality around their platform. So, I mean, everyone had the idea. At the end of the day, one company got the market because they just executed better than everybody else. Same with Google. At the end of the 90s, you had 10 search engines. And even, don't get me wrong. I mean, what Google did with backlinks was very innovative in 1998. But then again, there were other companies like Inktomi that was acquired actually by Yahoo in 2001 that had built very similar technologies. There was GoTo, came out of Idea Lab that we were talking about both with Nikos earlier. That was just a listing of paid links that eventually became what was AdWords on Google. So it's how you execute. I mean, thank you.
I think that you're living on a great note, Ilias. I want to thank you very much, all three of you, for being here. I think that you raised excellent points in both how we can actually have a profitable business, but also keep it a little bit human-centric, and remember that it's all about moving forward all together. I want to thank everyone for watching, and the Free Market Roadshow is going to be with you again on the next event, May 26, 5 p.m. Central European Time. We're going to be in Kiev, hosted by Bentukidze Center, a panel discussion on non-intended consequences of regulations, what we have forgotten since 1989. This sounds really interesting to me. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a very good night.
Thank you.